Buster Merryfield played the lovable old rogue Uncle Albert in the classic British sitcom Only Fools and Horses. With his catchphrase, "During the war," he would regale the cast with tales of his wartime exploits in the Royal Navy, which always seemed to involve being sunk. As Del Boy called him, England's greatest sailor since Nelson lost the Armada. But did you know that Buster Merryfield really did serve in the Second World War? And unlike Uncle Albert, none of the 4 ships that he sailed on was sunk. And unlike his TV character, Buster didn't serve in the Royal Navy. He actually served in the army for the entire war, rising from the ranks to become an officer and a jungle warfare instructor. This is the little-known story of Uncle Albert's real wartime service. Buster Merryfield was born in Battersea, London, in November 1920. Now, Buster was not his actual name. At a whopping 9.5 pounds when he was born, his grandfather called him Buster, and the name stuck. His real name, although very few knew it until he died, was actually, like his father, Harry. The family lived in Musjid Road, yet another London road named after a 19th century battle, this one from the Second Anglo-Afghan War. It was here that his older sister and only sibling, Irene, died of rheumatic fever when she was just 8 and he was 4. His mother, Lily, took on a charring job at cleaning people's houses to enable young Buster to attend the local grammar school, Sir Walter St John's or St John's. A later pupil at the school was actor Melvin Hayes, who played Bombardier Beaumont in It Ain't Half Hot Mum. Whilst Buster played both football and cricket for the school, it was when the gym master, Mr Beaumont, formed a boxing club that he found his natural sport. Buster's right-handed cross delivered onto his opponent's jaw became his trademark as he became London Secondary School's champion at the age of 14. He was to retain that title until he left school 4 years later, eventually crowning his school sporting career by winning the Schoolboys Great Britain Championship. So when Uncle Albert claimed that he'd boxed for the Navy, "They called my left hand Trotter's Trembler," he wasn't completely making his sporting prowess up. Whilst that boxing prowess was a similarity, the lives of Albert Trotter and Buster Merryfield were very different. Contrary to his rum-drinking old sailor character in the comedy series, Buster was actually teetotal throughout his life. Leaving school in 1938, Buster joined the Westminster Bank, now NatWest, working in their head office in Lombard Street, sorting cheques. Towards the very end of the year, Merryfield, along with some of his colleagues who were concerned about the deteriorating political situation in Europe, joined the Territorial Army, the British Army Reserve at the time. He wasn't alone. Between 1938 and the outbreak of the Second World War in September 1939, the TA more than doubled in numbers to over 400,000 men. Now, to put that into perspective, the current British Army Reserves stands at just under 30,000 men. Buster joined the 118th Field Gun Artillery Unit, but the huge influx of volunteers meant that equipment and even uniforms were in short supply. Initially, he and his intake paraded in their civilian clothes, and by the time war finally broke out, he'd yet to fire a live shell. With the situation in Europe spiralling towards another conflict, the TA were called up days before war was declared. Buster Merryfield was 18 years old. He would serve his country throughout the war and was only demobbed 8 months after it had finished in 1946. Initially stationed at a large country house near Stanmore in Middlesex, he found himself still without live shells to practice with, and thus the time was spent in a round of endless polishing, parading and exercise. Actually, with his boxing experience, Buster was swiftly made a PT instructor. Promoted to Lance Bombardier, the artillery version of Lance Corporal, he eventually ended up, via Coventry and Carmarthen, at Southampton in the autumn of 1940. It was there in early 1941 that he found himself watching the film We Dive at Dawn in a cinema which is now the Mayflower Theatre, when he survived a bomb which destroyed the front of the cinema and a row of shops opposite. Heading outside, he was blown off his feet by another bomb landing nearby, flying through the air and hitting a wall. Incredibly, apart from some bruises, Buster walked away unscathed. As the year progressed, he was promoted to Bombardier, Corporal, and one night was on duty and got chatting to the officer of the watch. The officer was an ex-grammar school boy, just like Buster, and that inspired him. The following morning, Buster marched into his commander's office and asked permission to apply to become an officer. His application was accepted. It was before he attended the Officer Cadet Training Unit that he met Iris Mountford whilst ice skating in Richmond. In a whirlwind wartime romance, they married in June 1942. Buster and Iris would spend the rest of their lives together. By the time they were married, Buster Merrifield had been commissioned as Second Lieutenant Merrifield, Light Anti-Aircraft Artillery. His first posting as an officer was commanding 4 Boffer anti-aircraft guns at Windsor Castle. On one occasion, he was marching through the gardens when a corgi dog grabbed his leg. As he tried to shake it off, he came round a corner and ran straight into King George VI and his wife, Queen Elizabeth. Upon seeing the young officer trying to stand to attention, attempting to salute, with a corgi grabbing his gaiter, the royal couple burst out laughing. Buster Merrifield would get many more people laughing during his life. But first, there was a war to get through. Towards the end of 1942, Buster was issued with tropical uniform, given a 48-hour pass to say goodbye to both Iris and his parents, and report to a troopship up near Glasgow. He was about to celebrate his 22nd birthday. Arriving at Greenock on the River Clyde, Buster Merrifield boarded a troopship, the SS Almanzora, and set out for destination unknown, but somewhere tropical based on the uniform. Sailing around the north coast of Ireland, the ship zigzagged down the Atlantic, before joining a convoy of 20 ships, protected by a cruiser and a couple of destroyers off the coast of Sierra Leone in West Africa, before then proceeding to Cape Town and then on to Durban. It was here that war and death finally came to Buster. He shared a cabin with 3 other junior officers. The night after they'd docked, one of the officers, called Joe, who'd been withdrawn all day, disappeared. As the night wore on, Buster suddenly had a gut feeling that something was wrong. Getting up, he made his way to the bathroom. One of the toilet cubicles was locked, and with no response to either his knocking or calling, Buster hauled himself up on the dividing wall and peered over. Joe was slumped on the floor. Blood and gore smeared the cubicle. He'd put his service revolver to his head. It was the first time that Buster had ever seen a dead person. And unfortunately, it wouldn't be the last. Incredibly, less than 24 hours later, he would witness another horrific death. Merrifield was ordered to report to Clarewood Camp, just outside Durban. Arriving at the station in the dark, he successfully leapt across a gap between the carriage and the platform. One young soldier, however, was not so lucky. Falling down the gap as the train pulled away, he was mangled by the wheels. From never seeing a dead body in his life, Buster Merrifield had seen 2 violent deaths in the space of 24 hours. In May 1943, he was sent with a small detachment of men to meet a ship arriving in Durban. On board the ship, a Dutch merchant vessel, were German prisoners of war, men from Rommel's Afrika Korps, captured in the North African campaign. As Buster supervised the prisoners off the ship, it was the only time he came face to face with a German during the war, because Buster was now sent to India to fight the Japanese. 6 weeks after he arrived in the subcontinent, his camp received a visit from Lieutenant Colonel Lord Moynihan, who had been given responsibility for setting up a jungle warfare training centre. Having interviewed all the officers, Moynihan, for reasons unknown, picked Buster Merrifield from Battersea, a man who'd never seen a jungle before, for the task. Buster headed off to the camp that was being established at Nagpur in Central Province, where he was given a team of NCOs to help him design and build an assault course for the recruits who'd soon be arriving for their training. With no knowledge of jungles, Buster spent every hour of his spare time reading every book he could find on jungles, survival skills, tropical fruits, and how to cope with tropical diseases. There would be an irony in that last subject, but more of that in a moment. He also spent whole days walking through the neighbouring jungle to get a feel for his subject, sometimes spending the night out there away from the camp. Then one day, whilst riding his motorbike, his vision started to blur. And no amount of shaking his head or blinking could make it any better. In fact, it seemed to make it worse. Arriving back at camp, the medical officer gave him the bad news. Despite all his reading on tropical diseases, thanks to his frequent trips into the jungle, Buster had contracted malaria. And just for good measure, he then went down with dysentery. And then finally, his face swelled up so badly that he couldn't open his eyes without manual assistance. The medical officers were baffled as to his condition, but thought it was an allergic reaction to a tropical plant. Which one, however, they couldn't say. There was only one thing for it. And so now, rather than training Chindits or fighting in Burma against the Japanese, Lieutenant Merrifield was placed on a hospital ship, heading back to Britain. Having made a full recovery, he was once more placed on anti-aircraft duties, firstly in Kent and then in Suffolk, attempting to shoot down incoming V-1 pilotless bombs heading towards London. Throughout the war, Buster had kept his hand in at boxing. It was at his final posting in North Devon that he entered the Army's South West District Boxing Championships, which, as an ex-schoolboy champion, he won. He went on to win the Southern Command Championships too, knocking out his opponent from the Parachute Regiment in the opening round. This victory took him to the Southern England Championships, where he reached the final, beating the Canadian Army champion en route. But in the final, his luck finally ran out. By now, the war had ended, and Buster was waiting, like every other serviceman, to be demobbed, a process that the British government decided would start with the eldest men first. And being just 24, despite serving in the whole war, Buster was a fair way down the line. It was now, in an effort to relieve the boredom, and not too keen on boxing after his recent pummelling, that Buster Merrifield took his very first steps into the entertainment industry. Producing a variety show for the troops, he also took to the stage as Dr. Wesowski, a Polish tightrope walker. Now, Buster has many talents, but tightrope walking was not one of them. And yet, the troops were amazed by his agility. Little did they know that it was a con. Buster wasn't actually performing on a tightrope at all. In a hoax that Uncle Albert or Del Boy would have been proud of, he was actually standing on a plank, painted black, that matched the backdrop, with a white rope pinned to the front. On the 16th of March 1946, he was finally demobbed. He had served his country for the entire war, and then some. Buster Merrifield rejoined the Westminster Bank and moved into branch management, moving up the management ladder until finally becoming branch manager at Thames Ditton in 1971. During this time, his daughter Karen had been born in December 1947, and his little family had moved to Byfleet in Surrey. He'd also started to get more and more involved with amateur dramatics. When he finally took early retirement from the bank in 1978, and despite being 58, he immediately applied to become a professional actor. When he finally took early retirement from the bank in 1978, and despite being 58, he immediately applied to become a professional actor. Within a few years, he was gaining regular work, and had even landed some minor roles in several TV productions. It was whilst performing in Panto at Windsor in January 1985 that he received, or rather Iris received, a call from Ray Butt, the producer of the hit comedy show Only Fools and Horses. Assuming that they wanted him for another small role, he travelled up to London. Little did Buster Merrifield know that his life, at 64 years of age, was about to change again. Both the producer and the writer of the show, which have now run for 3 highly successful series, had a huge problem on their hands. Leonard Pearce, who'd played Del and Rodney Trotter's granddad, had died just before Christmas. They had decided not to replace him, but to introduce a new character into the dynamic, Grandad's estranged brother, Uncle Albert. The key question they asked Buster, the former bank manager and resident of Surrey, was whether he could do a Cockney accent. Peeling back the years, Buster replied to their question with his very best Battersea accent. Uncle Albert was born. Viewers first saw him make an appearance in the episode Strained Relations at Grandad's funeral, although he'd actually filmed the next episode, Hole in One, before that. Uncle Albert would appear in the next 4 series and 9 Christmas specials, regaling anyone who would listen with his wartime service in the Navy. The Pacific, the Arctic convoys, and everywhere in between, he was there, and almost every ship he served on ended up sinking. His line, "During the war," became a catchphrase which the audience loved and characters would raise their eyes at. In one of the very last shows, when he's about to say that line and Del Boy threatens to pour a cup of tea over his head if he does, Uncle Albert deftly switches to "During the 1939-45 conflict with Germany." The Christmas special, when Del and Rodney become millionaires and Albert gets a boat, which he sinks, was watched by 24 million viewers, the most watched sitcom episode in British TV history. Buster Merryfield passed away at Poole, Dorset, in June 1999. He was 78 years old. He was buried at the nearby Verwood Cemetery, where Irish joined him in 2002. For all his funny lines as Uncle Albert, one serious line sticks in my head. Showing his medals to Boise and Marlene's son, he said, "Perhaps one day you'll get a chance to win one. But then again, hopefully not." It was a sentiment shared by many veterans, some of whom were decorated or mentioned in dispatches, like my granddad at Anzio and my Uncle Alf in Normandy. Buster Merryfield didn't participate in any great battles, nor was he awarded any medals for bravery. His story is probably like a lot of our relatives' stories, reasonably mundane, seeing parts of the world they'd never imagined visiting, punctuated with some funny moments, some proud moments, and some sad losses of friends or horrific sights. A young man who spent nearly 6 years serving his country. Buster Merryfield as Uncle Albert made us laugh, but Buster Merryfield, the veteran, deserves our respect and gratitude too. I do love telling these little, unknown, untold stories from British history, and you can get more exclusive content by becoming a patron. There's a link in the description below. A big thanks to Warren, Anita, Rob, Christine and George for your support. And if you enjoyed this video, then you might like this one too. Thanks for joining me today. Keep well, and I look forward to sharing more stories from British history with you very soon.